Good evening. Those of you who worship here regularly know that every week I have a problem with the sound system, so it's about to go off. It always does as soon as I speak. But anyway, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to, isn't this the most lovely summer evening? And I have a list of lovelies that I want to mention. One is, it's a lovely evening, summer evening. It's a lovely town. It's a lovely church building. Isn't it lovely? It's in the evening sun, beautiful. We're going to make some lovely music after having eaten some lovely gateau. And I'm sure I could go on with a few more lovelies, but you get the point. Keep going. You are most welcome. Many of you, of course, I know as folk from St Andrews, and others of you I don't know, but I hope I will recognize you again when you come back next week, and the next week, and the next week. It's so nice to get out of the house after a long pandemic, and to feel that you can breathe again. In the sanctuary, however, you're meant to keep your mask on unless you've got a medical reason for not. You will be invited to sing at one point, but you have to sing behind your mask. I'm sorry about that. I'm hoping that maybe Mr. Ford will change the rules by next week, and we'll see. These August gatherings for Gateau and Grace they're not quite a worship service, they're not quite a concert, and so they're a hybrid thing called a gathering. So we'll just make up what that means, but I hope that you will enjoy this evening and feel that it will have been refreshing for body and soul to be here. In a way, we're celebrating the retreat of COVID, as I mentioned, and doing so, I'm joined by a team of others who put this together, these August gatherings, and I'd like to thank Suzanne Gourlock, who's outside, I think, still cleaning up, who was in charge of the Gateau team. I'd like to thank Paul and Mary McCool, where are they? They're in the back there, who were in charge of the publicity, both written and around the town, and all of that sort of thing. I'd like to thank Martha Gleddy. Martha's up in the gallery. Hello. Who's in charge of making sure everything worked tonight okay. A very particular thanks to James Vanden Brink, who has had the most work because he's in charge of the music tonight. And you'll hear him play in a moment. He is our resident music director and organist, and we're so delighted that I worked with him very much to put these things together. He's done the share of the work. And I also want to thank and welcome Cynthia Vermeer. I've known Cynthia for many years, and it's a lovely, lovely treat to have you come and play flute with it tonight. Cynthia, you're going to hear more about Cynthia in a moment from James. If you came in, you probably came in eating cake, which means that when you leave, take your remains with you, and there are places outside to dump those paper products and so on when you get outside. If you need to go leave the sanctuary before the end, i.e. to go to the bathroom, there is one in that corner over to your left, so go through either door, and then if you go out this door, just pass over to the other side, and that's where the bathroom is. Just march out and march in again. Because I don't know who designed this church in the 1830s, but they put the front, the doors at the front. There must have been some major reason for that at the time, but I haven't been told about it yet. As I mentioned earlier, you're invited to come back, and we have more room, as you can see, even with COVID restrictions, and we have more room upstairs as well. So please come back, and please bring a friend next time. You won't be allowed in unless you do. So that's next Wednesday, the next Wednesday, and the next Wednesday, and we have different instrumentalists as guests each week. And of course, I should also mention that you're invited to come to worship at 11 o'clock every Sunday morning. And I should also, after all of this, probably introduce myself. My name is Clyde Irvine, and what should I say about myself? Well, let me say this. I'm ministering here for the next year or two, and I'm sort of giving myself the title Minister Pro Tem because the Latin sounds better than just for a while. So that's who I am, and I'm delighted to welcome you here on behalf of the congregation. I think that's all I need to say. Has the sign gone off? I knew it would. Okay. I'll just shout. You've got an order of service, no, an order of gathering, and on we go. And the first thing in our program is to hear from the organ and the organist.
Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see faces actually standing this way. I always have my back towards you every Sunday, or some of you, and so it's neat to see the faces here. So the first piece I'm playing tonight, and I have a bit of a theme for each of the 4 evenings, and the theme is organ music composed during a pandemic. So all of the music I'll be playing each night, one organ solo, will be something that's been composed in the last year or so. Tonight's work is a piece called Elegy by the young German composer. He's actually, I think, born in 1998, not 99 as printed. But he just composed this in June. And I followed his YouTube channel and fell in love with it and said, I'm going to play this for this. So every week there will be another piece. So I don't know if you all know what an elegy is, but I thought I would share what it is and the explanation why I'm playing an elegy at an evening like this. So an elegy is a sad poem, usually written to praise and express sorrow for someone who has passed. And so this is my little nod to the sadness and the grief and the passing away of many people who have died because of COVID. And so I dedicate that to all of them and to the families who survived them. So here's Elegy by Paul Fay. That's my child.
No problem.
Thank you, thank you. Next I want to introduce to you our guest musician tonight, Cynthia Vermeer. I'd never met Cynthia prior to two or 3 weeks ago, and Clyde mentioned, hey, I know a really good flute player. You should call her up. And so I did, and I'm glad I did, because she's been so much fun to learn some music with, and sharing her gift of music, her God-given gift, and she wants to share that with you. And she's very excited too, and I'm excited. She wants to come back, she told me, so looking forward to that too. Tonight on the program we have 3 pieces now. A flute sonata by George Telemann from the Baroque era. It has 3 movements, so don't clap in between. There's a fast movement, the allegro, I believe. Yes, and then a slow movement, the largo, and then followed by another allegro. Or sorry, begins with a vivace and then ends with an allegro. So fast, slow, fast. And so just enjoy it. The organ, I'll be using nice soft flute stops, so you'll have a good sense of what this might have sounded like 300-400 years ago. Then we move into something totally different from Hansel and Gretel, a children's prayer, nice gentle piece. And then we end with a piece called Adoration. Cynthia and I both had never heard this piece, and we went flipping through some of her music after we met the first time. We're like, hey, this might be nice. So I found out that it was actually originally composed for piano and cello, and found a few recordings of it. Borowski is of Polish descent, was actually born in England and composed there. He also, I found out, wrote 3 sonatas for the organ, which I didn't know, so I may have some more study to do. So, a flute sonata by Telemann, Children's Prayer from Hansel and Gretel, and Adoration.
few words, actually. I wasn't going to say anything, but the Spirit is with me. It is such a blessing to be here, first of all. Such a beautiful sanctuary. So many things, like you say, to be thankful for, to be grateful for. When you've stopped playing and they tell you you're not allowed to play because you're giving off fumes and cooties and COVID, you start to lose your, for me personally, I started to lose my interest in playing. And it's a God-given gift that I kind of put to the side. We're all kind of in different places and struggling with it. And so this to me is such a gift tonight because it got me opening up my case again and finding one of my true loves, and it's music. And it speaks a language like no other. It doesn't matter where you come from, and it doesn't matter your circumstance or anything. We all have ears to hear, and whether it's a vibration that we have to hear that way, or we get to hear it in such a beautiful space, giving all the God the glory, and that we will continually be able to do this together and worship collectively, because it's a freedom and it's such a gift to be here. So thank you to both of these as we make some more music. Like James said, it's a children's prayer by Humperdinck. Okay, just wait.
Now for something totally different.
while you were playing and we were listening, it struck me just how long it's been since I've been heard live music. It's just so wonderful, wonderful. And it made me think of that very well-known verse of Paul's in his letter to the Philippians, where he writes, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. And we've had lots of unlovely things on our minds over the last year and a half. This has just been such a lovely, lovely thing. So. Now, before you hear a 40-minute word sermon, and you laugh, I'm going to invite you to stand, and we're going to sing a hymn. It's a lovely hymn. It's number 433 in the hymn book. It's the big blue hymn book in front of you. All creatures of our Lord and King. It's a lovely hymn. And we'll sing verses 1, 2, and 3, and then verse 6. 4, 3, 3. want to say just a few words about the word grace, or at least reflect on a story that is about grace. And it's a story that almost all of you, I'm sure, know off by heart. The story is one of Jesus' parables, and I will briefly read it, just in case you don't know it. But you know it well. Jesus speaks and tells this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father. And I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired hands.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a far way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son and threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to his father, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his fingers and sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate." Jesus' parable of the prodigal son is, of course, one of the best known and best loved parts of the Bible. It has inspired novels, films, and even, I'm told, a ballet. It also inspired Rembrandt, attested by the print, his famous print of the prodigal son, printed on the other side of your order. If you'd like to keep that beside you, that would be good. Some years ago, the famous Dutch Jesuit priest, Henry Nouwen, studied Rembrandt's painting in the Hermitage in St. Petersburg for hours and for days, and then wrote a brief book about the impact of that painting on his understanding of Jesus' parable. Of the 3 major characters in Rembrandt's painting, and that would be the 3 where the light is shining on them, I want to focus just for a few moments on the prodigal. What we know of the prodigal is very little, but we know he was part of a family, and we know he was a younger son. I'm the third of 3 boys, which means I know what it feels like to be a younger son. You're never the first to do anything. Not the first to go to school, not the first to shave, not the first to own a suit, not the first to drive a car. Younger siblings are sometimes act crazy just to get noticed. Like the prodigal, I left home for a distant country. It's called Canada. But the thing is, the younger son in Jesus' parable didn't just want to leave home. He wanted to leave his family behind. And so he asked his father for his share of the family inheritance. To us it might seem reasonable, but in that day that would have been an incredible insult. Because that request really meant this. It meant, "Dad, if you were dead, I would have it now, by rights. I would have what's coming to me right now. But since you're still alive and not likely to die anytime soon, I want what's coming to you in advance. Without protest, or without trying to persuade his son to stay, the father gave his unhappy son what he had asked for, enabling his departure for the distant country. In other words, as far from home as possible. In this parable of Jesus, of course, the father represents God, and the young prodigal represents those who want to get as far from God as possible. But then you look for a moment at Rembrandt's portrait, and you look at the figure of the father embracing this rebel son. And you wonder why any of us would ever want to leave such a father. And yet we do. We convince ourselves, or we are convinced by the world, that we must make our own way. We must win our own acceptance. Because nothing comes to us free in life. We're taught that, I think, from little children upwards. Nothing comes free, you've got to earn it. Which, of course, contradicts what the very word grace means. The world says to us, says Henry Nouwen, we'll love you, the world will love us if we're good looking, if we're intelligent, if we're wealthy, if we have a good education, if we have a good job, if we've got good connections, if we can produce, if we can sell, if we can buy much. There are endless ifs, he says, in the acceptance that the world gives us. Listening to such voices, the prodigal leaves. He tosses his father aside. Free of restraint, he now lives in grand style and makes an impression. But over time, of course, the prodigal's looks begin to fade. The novelty of his carefree life begins to wear thin. His money runs out. And to make matters worse, famine in the story of Jesus, famine devastated that distant country, leaving the prodigal a pauper. And then we get to this interesting detail. He's hired out by a citizen of that country to feed his pigs. And Jesus' mention of pigs says it all. For among Jews, for whatever reason we're not clear at the time, but among ancient Jews, pigs were so despised that there were rules to forbid Jews from owning pigs, touching pigs, eating pigs, and certainly looking after somebody else's pigs. The mention of pigs in Jesus' parable is actually meant to alert us to the fact this guy has totally lost his way. No good Jewish boy would be found feeding pigs in a pigsty. He's an outcast. He's gone. Lost. And yet, interestingly enough, it's in that pigsty that this young pauper prodigal begins to find grace. And he thinks to himself about home because he's hungry and he's homesick. And he thinks to himself about the hired hands at his father's estate and says, you know, they have plenty to eat and here I am with nothing. I think it's time I went home. And the key issue, of course, hanging in the air here is, can you go home? If you've lost your way in life, can you go home? Will his father welcome us? Welcome him? And will our Father welcome us with grace? As he made his way home, the prodigal began to rehearse his speech. We always do that when we're in trouble. I lie in bed and I think, what should I say? You know, we go through it and through it, That's what he did. He rehearsed his speech. Father, I've sinned against you. I'm not worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. But will the father welcome back a son who has hurt him, the father, so badly, who has hurt himself so badly, and who smells of pigs? Jesus' portrayal of the father's response to his son is classic. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion and ran to him, put his arms around him and kissed him. Aware of the mess that he'd made of his life, notice how Rembrandt portrays the prodigal. He's kneeling before his father, his emaciated body covered in the most filthy, dirty rags. Some of you know the pain of waiting, perhaps, for a rebel child to return. That, says Jesus in this parable, is how God feels. He longs for us. He's eager, metaphorically speaking, to fling his arms around us, kiss us, put the best robe upon us, a ring on our fingers, sandals on our feet, and kill a fatted calf to celebrate our return. And for the prodigal kneeling before his father with his father's arms around him, there are no stinging words of rebuke, no shaming. Instead, grace. Grace for this young man who had so carelessly tossed his father and his father's love aside years before. We've all done things in our lives of which we're ashamed. We all have things in our lives that we sort of hide because we don't want anybody else to know things about us that we think would shame us somehow. They would maybe reject us if they knew. But according to Jesus, that's not how God responds to people like us. God doesn't love you because you're worthy. And God doesn't stop loving you when you mess up. I want to repeat that because that's the word of grace I'd like you to take home. God doesn't love you because you're worthy. And God doesn't stop loving you because you mess up. God loves us freely out of his grace and forgives us wherever we've been, whatever we've done, out of that same grace. And that's my word for tonight.
Amen.
It's a word that we ought to tell others about. And so over to you.
Go tell it on the mountain.
And in the workplace, and in your jobs, and anywhere else.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed being here, and I hope you'll come back. We're going to have a parting prayer, and I'd like you to stand. It's been a great privilege to be here with you, and I want to thank James and Cynthia so much for what you brought to our gathering. But God has also been here, and God is here to bless. And I pray God's blessing on each of you into your life, whatever your life looks like, whatever challenges you face, whatever burdens you carry. God's grace is sufficient. And so may the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the comfort of God's Spirit fill your life, now and always.